Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. Private school vouchers are live statewide in Tennessee. This is taxpayer money that is now available for families to use at private schools. This year it's about $7,300. Doesn't cover full tuition at most private schools, but it makes a pretty good dent at most. More than 20,000 of these educational scholarships were available this year. Nearly twice that many students applied. And whether families were for them or against them in principle and practice, the money's now available and they have an opportunity to use it. This hour, we're hearing from those who know the program best, those who've researched the effectiveness of vouchers far outside Tennessee, and hearing from families who stand to benefit. And later this hour, we'll be taking your calls and trying to get answers to your questions about the program. We start this hour with Logan Key, a father in East Nashville who's waiting patiently to hear if his family received a voucher. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you, Blake. And thank you for coming back. Thank you for coming back to Nashville Public Radio.
Well, that means a lot. Full disclosure for everyone, Logan and I do know each other. We go to church. I'm usually being pulled away from him because he's talking to me too long before I'm trying to get out the door to lunch with the fam. But, you know, it's okay. I learn a lot this way. Also joining us to provide some context throughout the hours, WPLN education reporter Camelia Burris. Thanks for hopping in the studio today.
Thank you, Blake, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Logan, let's start with your experience, an experience that was had this year by roughly 38,000 Tennesseans just in the last couple of months. So you've got two kids, both in public school, but your family made the decision to send your older child to a private school for middle school starting this year. When did that process really get going?
Well, I think we were deliberating a couple of years ago about what to do next, because child finishes elementary, child goes to middle, and in a big city like this, there are a number of different options. And so we concluded in, I would say, September, October of my son's fifth grade year that we would begin looking at our options. And I told numerous people who asked, because as you know, people ask, where's your son going to go to middle school? All options were on the table.
Yeah. And you meant it. Well, the legislation that passed the legislature in January that created these school vouchers, as they're known, and I know that's not a term that everyone knows, and the official name is the Education Freedom Scholarship Program, but we're primarily calling them school vouchers. It passed in January. Did the approval of that law influence your decision to move your oldest into private?
No, not at all. In fact, when that law passed, and I'm a fairly keen observer of politics in Tennessee and outside Tennessee, and I kept up with it marginally, but we went through the private school selection process, admission testing. In tandem, we're going through the MNPS lottery process. In tandem, we're thinking our base zone school is fine. Our child may go there. And so the fact that the legislation passed in no way influenced what we were doing at that time.
So, you know, the legislation that passed, let me get to this. You grew up in a family of educators. I knew this before we even got ready for today's show. But your father was even like a public education reform activist for many years in Alabama, right? So listeners might be surprised to learn that you're kind of opposed to vouchers. So why?
Yeah. In fact, I'm not kind of opposed to it. The thing that passed in Tennessee, if I had been a voting member of the legislature, I would have unequivocally, categorically voted against it because I don't think it is an appropriate allocation of public resources. My father was a reform activist in education. He fought years primarily to assist undertaxed and underserved communities reap the benefits that the more suburban and better financed schools were reaping. And this issue was hardly contemplated back in the 90s when he was doing reform activism. But this, in my opinion, is a poor use of public resources.
So why apply?
Well, I'll have to tell you, it wasn't an easy thing to decide to do. In fact, I didn't fully realize that we qualified.
Yeah.
I watched the news. I saw that it passed. And in my mind, I'm thinking that the thing that passed was more comparable to what had already passed a few years ago with Nashville and Memphis.
With more income limits. Yeah.
Yes, and targeting those. And it was late at night one night, and I was reading one of the news sources that I'm fond of reading, the Tennessee Lookout.
Okay.
And I think it was a Sam Stockard article about the progress in the application process so far. And I'm reading that, and he's describing a program that some people qualify for regardless of income, and others qualify for if they're 3 times the maximum adjusted gross income for school lunch. And he's naming that figure. And I'm thinking, gosh, do I really qualify for this?
Yeah. I see. Well, let's actually let's put a pin in that and go over to some nuts and bolts with Camelia here, our education reporter here in the WPLN newsroom. So, can you kind of help me understand this process? Who is eligible for the program that is in place this year?
Sure. So there's about 20,000 applications that were available.
Right.
And of those, 10,000 were reserved for people who are low income. And that means for a household of 4, you have a family income of about $175,000.
So while low income, I mean, yeah, I think a lot of people would hear that and think that doesn't sound that low. The point is there is at least some income restriction.
Right.
Okay. What about the other 10,000?
The other half, there is no income restriction at all.
Okay. So do people call this a universal voucher program? Because I've heard that word. Is that disqualify?
Yeah, they are calling it a universal voucher program.
And unlike the pilot program, it's also available no matter where you live in the state?
Right. So the pilot program was for 3 counties, Hamilton, Davidson, and Shelby County. So this is for a statewide program.
Yeah. And which, of course, was one of the most divisive things, that it was easy to vote on a program that didn't affect your county. Suddenly it's in your county, and it's tougher to make that vote. Does Tennessee's program sound like programs in other states? I mean, or do we differ much?
Well, I actually was working in Miami for a couple of years before I moved back home. I'm from Nashville. And when I was there, they enacted a universal voucher program. And something that was similar is their first year, they projected about 2/3 of the students would already be in private school when they started. And we actually had a state policy or a state report that said something similar. So we were similar in that a lot of the kids who were going to be in the program were already in private school anyway.
Okay, so the thought is that this would certainly help families who were already in private schools. A question about how many would actually be moving over from a public school into a private for the first time.
Right, and we're actually not tracking that data. So with the first pilot program, you had to say what school the students went to. But for this program, you don't have to say whether or not they were in public school or private school. So some people are complaining that it's hard to track whether or not this is actually expanding private school access because we're not tracking it.
If you're just joining us, I'm Blake Farmer. This is Nashville. We're talking about school vouchers today. Camelia Burris, our education reporter at WPLN, is in the studio, along with Logan Key, who is a father whose family has applied for one of these vouchers. Have you heard the window closed? I believe it was 2 weeks ago. Although I think anybody who really intended to get one of these educational scholarships, a school voucher, needed to do it long ago. Have you heard back?
No, I haven't. In fact, I check my email frequently to see if there's a response. The only thing that I heard was when I submitted it, a confirmation that I'd submitted, and then I will occasionally log in and under review.
Under review. Do you have any? I mean, we've heard from others, in fact, preparing for the show, from a family in Murfreesboro who had at least given the indication that they had received a school voucher. And if you've received one, your family, we'd love to hear from you later in the hour. We are taking calls, so be ready for that cue. But you have no indication of whether you're on a waiting list or if it's just taking time?
No, all right. No indication at all.
Well, we should be able to get more answers later on this hour. But tell me about this. You mentioned not really being fond of vouchers, in fact, kind of opposing them, and yet you went ahead and applied for it. How do you settle that? Why apply when you have this kind of fundamental opposition?
Well, so in my opinion, the good people of Tennessee, through their elected legislators, have appropriated this money.
Yeah.
And so as an informed consumer, I'm okay applying and receiving one of these, even though I think it's bad policy. Much the same way that there are other public policies that many people may benefit from financially that might be inequitable.
Yeah.
So, for example, interest income deduction from a tax return, tax advantaged accounts of all types. So it's not the first example of a public policy that I might otherwise be opposed to but benefit from financially.
And I guess you had mentioned the Hope Scholarship that's pretty direct, where it's would you directly approve of having a lottery in the state? Well, maybe not, but the money goes toward putting your kid through school. You're probably going to take that $2,000 a semester.
Yeah, exactly.
So here's my question, and I guess it's still a question mark as to whether your family will benefit this year from the school vouchers, but do you already see your feelings about them kind of changing over time?
Not really, and I'll tell you why. I'm perhaps even more cool to the idea because even if I could make peace with vouchers in concept, the way the funds are distributed are grossly inequitable. So, for example, think about how a number of private schools have money set aside to subsidize the tuition of their own students. Those private schools, and rightfully so, go to incredible lengths to make sure that those funds are being allocated equitably. One of the financial aid applications we filled out for a private school asked not only about adjusted gross income, but about home equity, about how much our cars are worth, about how much we have in savings, about how much we spent on vacation last year. Here again, the effort to make sure that funds are allocated equitably. This one in Tennessee, it's $7,000 for you dealing in out like Uno cards.
Well, but in the same way that I think the Hope Scholarship is not means-based, and it's really just considered money that is available no matter your income.
Right.
Well, we're going to dig deep into this, and we're going to want to hear your voices later in the hour. This is your turn to talk, but we need to take a quick break. Camelia Burris, please stay with us for the next segment. Logan Key, thank you for sharing your experience about applying for a school voucher. Let us know how it turns out.
Thank you for having me.
Have you applied? Have you been approved? Is your school participating? What questions do you have? We'll try to get you answers. It's your turn to talk later this hour, and I'll go ahead and give you the number if it's not on the top of your head, 615-760-2000. We'll be right back. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org. Funding for This is Nashville comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. We're talking school vouchers, and we are taking your calls later this hour. This is the first year of what you might call a universal school voucher program in Tennessee. It was spearheaded by Governor Bill Lee, passed in January, took effect in February. Most families statewide with school-age kids are eligible for the program, though it's currently capped at 20,000 vouchers. We're going to talk through more of the particulars as well as hear about the philosophy and the future. Joining us now is Chelsea Crawford, Executive Director of Tennessee CAN. Prior to joining Tennessee CAN, she served as Chief of Staff at the Tennessee Department of Education, and prior to that, she worked on lobbying efforts to make school vouchers a reality, among other school reforms. And staying with us during this segment is WPLN's education reporter, Camelia Burris. Camelia, thank you. Chelsea, welcome.
Thank you so much, Blake, for having me.
Well, very glad to have you. So 20,000 scholarships available. I think the number now is 38,000 students, families who have applied. What does that tell you?
I think it tells us that there's demand for high-quality school options for families and students all across the state. We heard from a parent just a little while ago that talked about the years of deliberation that their family went through in order to choose where they wanted to send their child to middle school, and every option was on the table. I think parents really do have a concerted effort and demonstrate that year over year when it comes to selecting the best fit school for their student. Apparently, when we passed this new law and it went into effect, we have a lot of folks who are seeking to take advantage of the scholarship option because they believe that those schools might be the best educational fit for their child.
Yeah. Well, and you, as you know well, there were many people who at least said they had their doubts that people, really wanted these. You've been working on this issue for quite some time, even back when I covered the legislature from time to time, covered education from time to time. You were working on this issue. What were those early days of advocacy like when you started talking about school vouchers?
I think that's a great question. And I think it also brings up a point that this is maybe newer to Tennessee or Tennesseans, but it's not necessarily a new trend on the national level. Lots of other states have come before Tennessee when it comes to creating school choice options, whether that's in the public school space or also extending into private schools. Of course, when we think about this particular program, there were several iterations of private school choice programs that the General Assembly passed preceding the Freedom Scholarships. That was the individualized education account that was passed in 2017. That program is really particularly tailored for students who have significant disabilities and supporting their families to get services that support them. There's the education savings account option that came in 2019. It was implemented a few years later, which is a smaller scope private school choice program. It was only in 2 counties to start. I think it's now in 4 counties, but does have some income restrictions. And so I think as you have seen at the national level, more awareness of school choice options, including in the private school choice space, and you have seen new programs come online in Tennessee, we're seeing a growing awareness and clearly a hunger for something that might be different from the options that were available to families previously.
Yeah. It seemed back in the day that I don't know whether we just wanted it to sound like this or some people said this who weren't really wise to kind of where things were heading. I was like, well, this is just for this group. This is just for this group. Well, it's just for this income. When clearly there's a trajectory here to make it available to anyone, to as many people as possible. So how do you level kind of those initial arguments to get something off the ground that kind of says we're going to keep it limited with where clearly things are headed, which is to get these school vouchers into as many hands as will use them?
Yes. Well, I think all of this for me centers around empowering parents and empowering families to then do exactly what they want to do already, which is make really smart education decisions for their children. Just by way of personal story, I am the daughter of a public school educator. She taught for her entire career in Memphis, back when it was just Shelby County schools. But I grew up going alongside with her to the grocery store and hearing the incredible impacts from former students that she saw, call across the produce section and say, "Hey, Miss Crawford, you were my favorite science teacher. You were my favorite math teacher." She made a decision for my brother and I to go to private schools for K-12. And so on that teacher salary, was able to make some sacrifices and ensure that my brother and I were able to access what she believed was the best fit education for her children. I think parents are increasingly looking for individualized and tailored options for their kids, especially coming out of the pandemic. We're seeing all kinds of new models, learning pods, micro schools. The way that we are thinking about education has changed and will continue to change into the future. And so for me, it really centers back on having the local control. The clearest form of local control that a family can have around K-12 education decisions is where they choose to send their child to school.
I want to talk some more this hour, certainly about the sort of philosophy behind, moving to school vouchers. But I do want to get to a few more of the particulars that I know are questions people have on their mind. Because one came up as we were prepping for this show, somebody who's got kids in a private school, and that school is not participating, to their surprise and dismay. But I'll know. We've talked about who's eligible to participate as in apply for the money, but what goes into a school's decision to participate?
That's a really good question. And I think, this first year of the program was the first year. And we have a lot of schools that are new to this type of program. It's new in Tennessee. It's new to them, of course, as well. And we'll have, more schools who see familiarity in the process next year. I'll tell you anecdotally, one of the schools that I talked to, a private school, and they were considering participating in the program this year. They were just a little reticent because it was new and they didn't know the ins and outs of how the process would go, what they needed to do with the state, what forms, what questions must we ask parents. And so there were a number of private schools, I think, that said, you know what, we're going to sit out in year one and we're going to see how this program plays out before we make a decision on whether to get involved in the program in future years.
Does it change what kind of testing they have to do?
Well, that's a great question. And I will say, just as a quick aside, Tennessee's law around education freedom scholarships does carry accountability. Our law requires that private schools who are accepting students on these scholarships are going to administer either the state assessment, which is TCAP, that's what all of our students in public schools take, or they have the option to administer a nationally normed reference test. Many of them are doing those things. In fact, I think the majority of the schools that are participating in the program this year were already offering TCAP to their students as the way to measure student learning and growth. So for many schools, it may not have changed a thing.
But that might be a reason you wouldn't, because it would perhaps have to change some of the testing that you do, so you'd have some state accountability, and that would become public.
That's right. And one thing I will say, I have great confidence that schools know how to do the business of education. When it comes to accepting dollars and scholarships and statewide approval and statewide application, that might be something that's a little newer for our private school partners.
Yeah. Just a note, we did ask the Tennessee Department of Education to participate in today's show. After a few emails back and forth, they said a scheduling conflict would make them unable to participate, but we do hope they'll join in the future. And if you're just joining us, we're talking school vouchers. We've got Chelsea Crawford from Tennessee CAN as well as Camellia Burris. CAN in Tennessee CAN, what does that stand for?
The Campaign for Achievement Now.
Okay, so I can see why that's buried on the website. I was looking quickly. That must stand for something? Okay, well, we'll just call it Tennessee CAN. But they've been a big push behind Tennessee school vouchers, in Tennessee. We are taking your calls, so you got questions. We do too, and we're here to answer them as well. You've got the right people in the studio to answer. The number is 615-760-2000. You can leave a question with Catherine on the phone, or you can join us on air. We'd love that. 615-760-2000. All right, so Camellia, WPLN's education reporter, who does get the money? Do families receive a check, or does this go to the school?
The money goes directly to the school to cover costs like tuition, books for the kid, or other classroom supplies.
Is there any... Does the, so you apply, you kind of, I don't know, win the lottery, but it's a 50-50 shot, it sounds like. You get one of these vouchers this year. Is there any, does that mean anything for future years? Like, do you get that for the next year going forward?
I know you have to apply each year, but I also saw that students who were in the pilot program, there is some slots available for them for the part of the $10,000. For the first year of scholarships. Okay,
so for the pilot program that's been in a handful of counties, when they apply, they do get some preference for those income capped vouchers, the $10,000. Chelsea, do we know anything more about future years and preference for folks who've already received a voucher?
That's a great question. I think, this process requires two levels of decision making. One is in the state legislature and one is actually in rulemaking, which is very nitty gritty and not necessarily sees as much light of day. But the State Board of Education really handles that work for this particular program.
Is that right?
That's right.
So you're saying that might not be spelled out in the law. It's something the State Board of Education is going to have to decide.
That's right. And many of our policies worked hand in glove in that way, where you have the law that dictates the key framework, and then you've got rules that put more parameters on how the program is administered.
It seems like this could be a huge debate going forward. I'm even thinking of families I know who at a private school are getting financial aid, and it's guaranteed for some period of time so they can make plans. One could imagine, though, you start saying, you have preference, like, well, then there are really not many new slots every year, right?
That's right. And the law that was passed actually has an escalator in it. So if we see 20,000 seats, which I believe we will see them filled this coming fall, given the sheer demand on the front end, that program can grow by 5,000 seats in the following school year. And so what we will see this fall is when school starts, when we have 20,000 students taking that scholarship with them to a private school, we will generate 5,000 additional additional seats for the following school year. That assumes no legislative changes. One thing I can tell you is this program is wildly popular amongst families and Republican primary voters in particular. There was a poll that was released this week that said 66% of those voters would like to see expansion of the program because there was such high demand on the front end. And so we'll continue to kind of implement at the state level. We'll see how families are experiencing their new schools this year. But certainly I think all of the folks at the state level advocacy and state level legislature will be looking at how we can monitor this program over time and also make improvements.
You're listening to a chat about school vouchers here in Tennessee, a very timely one. I'm Blake Farmer. This is Nashville. We're also streaming on YouTube. We've been doing that this week. Hope you've been enjoying it. If you're watching live, you're welcome to just pop a question in the comments on the YouTube feed. Yes, we're trying that out too. So join the conversation that way, or you can call us at 615-760-2000. So we asked Democratic legislator Caleb Hemmer of Nashville, who's been a pretty vocal critic of the voucher program, if he thought there was a mechanism that would help make it sound policy going forward. Here's what he said.
One of the most important roles legislators play is providing checks and balances to ensure government programs are operating properly. That's why I've been very vocal about the disastrous rollout of this program. Tennessee's voucher initiative is a new entitlement program using $125 million in taxpayer funds. Yet that money is now flowing to private schools with little to no oversight to ensure it's being used appropriately. Just last year, the program asked for data such as the students' prior schools, but that question has now been removed. We've seen other states face fraud, waste, and abuse in their voucher programs, and we don't want that happening here in Tennessee.
Yeah, Representative Hemmer's referencing that, this week, like the governor was asked this question, too, about the voucher program. Kind of bipartisan criticism, frankly, about the lack of data collection that you might expect. The application doesn't ask for info about where a student had previously attended school or if they were enrolled at a private school already. Also doesn't ask for that financial information from families like Logan Key was talking about. Chelsea, why would we not gather some of that information that Representative Hemmer and others are referencing?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to acknowledge that the data collection is in line with the law and what the law called for. Yeah. I understand there's going to be lots of questions about the students that are attending private schools using these scholarships and how they are learning. In my perspective, I think we measure and hold accountable those schools in this program in two ways. One, it's parent satisfaction. Are their children enjoying their school experience? Are they seeming to get the academic education that parents expect children to get when they go to school? The second is through assessment and accountability. As I mentioned before, this program will require students to take one of those tests, either TCAP or a nationally norm reference test, and to then have that information publicly available for Tennesseans all across the state. And so we will know next spring, how students who are participating in the scholarship program are performing against academic expectations when it comes to grades and subjects.
We're talking about school vouchers this hour, and it's your turn to talk. And we'll go to the phones now. We've got a call coming in from David in Nashville. What do you have to say?
They're having a conversation on the voucher program.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so just kind of based on my experience previously on the school board, I just think it's
I'm sorry. This is David Fox. Actually, you were cut off at the beginning. This is David Fox, the former chairman of the Metro School Board, correct?
Yes, that's right. I'm sorry. I should have said that.
You may have said it. We didn't hear it on the air for some reason, but go ahead.
Yes, I just know my experience and watching so closely, school boards don't really embrace alternatives to the school system. Mm-hmm. And so it's been awfully important for the state legislature and the governor's office to provide options, whether it's through charter schools or now through ESAs or vouchers. And what I think would be a terrific thing to develop is that if local governments will recognize the impact that vouchers can have by adding in their own component of funding. This is, to date, as I understand it, just the portion that comes from the state funding, which is an important part. But in Nashville, the majority of the funding comes from the local government, with a much smaller piece from federal government. So it would just be most helpful if we want to optimize results for kids. Local governments will consider, kicking in, per capita amounts on their own, and that would further encourage schools and educators to create effective schools for students. So that was only comment I was really going to offer, but I appreciate the fact the legislature's doing it, and appreciate Chelsea's work at Tennessee Can and helping bring it about. All
right, David Fox, former chairman of the Metro School Board, thanks for calling in. Chelsea Crawford, is that something that would be, I mean, it's hard to imagine, let's say, the Metro Council approving, money that would maybe match state money to go towards school vouchers, but are there local communities who would? And I don't want to count out Metro, maybe they would.
Yeah, I think that's a great question and a great wondering and idea that all of our local school districts should consider. For me, I want to say personally, I don't particularly care which type of school a child goes to as long as they are getting the academic foundations they need to be successful after they graduate from high school. I think, too, we can look at different options and models for schools for students and families, and we can do that at the same time as supporting success and even better academic achievement in our public school system. The old adage is we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we have demonstrated that in Tennessee over the last certainly 8 years or so under Governor Lee's leadership. I mean, just this past session, the General Assembly approved $640 million new dollars for our public school system, which brings the state investment in K-12 public education to about $6.9 billion every year.
Does this money come that funds this program, the $120-30 million that goes toward it this year, does it come out of public schools? In other words, because the money typically follows the student. Would that be the case here, that if a student leaves a public school, then that money is sort of walking out the door with them and going with them to the private school? That's
a great point of clarification, because I think people do tend to think of it as a zero-sum game. If we're going to give a scholarship over here, it means that public schools will lose something, and they are not losing dollars as a result of this program.
Okay, we'll have more questions about that going forward, I'm sure. But let's go back to the phones. Bernadette in Brentwood, who, maybe has gone back and forth, public and private schools. Bernadette, go ahead.
We're the product of the public school system.
Bernadette, can you start over? I hit the button too late, so go ahead.
That's okay. My kids were products of the public schools. It was great. My question, though, is I've known several students who have been in the private sector and then for one reason or another came to the public school midway through the year, halfway through the year. So what happens to their funding? Does the fund stay with that voucher money stay with the school for the whole year? And does the public school lose money if the student loses? Then because the public school has to take everybody.
Yeah.
And so what happens with that money?
Bernadette, that's a great question. Thanks for leaving it here. Chelsea, do you have an answer there?
Well, I think, like I said earlier, this is not necessarily a zero-sum game. So when a student chooses to take a scholarship to a private school, our public schools have not lost dollars this coming school year. I just shared those numbers. Now, in terms of, students being able to move between schools, I fully support that. I believe that, finding the best fit school for your student is the most important thing, because even the very best school might not be the best fit for every child. Now, these expenses related for the scholarship program, they have to pay tuition at the private school. If there's money left over in that scholarship, they can use it for approved expenses like Camelia was mentioning, tutoring, uniforms, other supports for their child. That is the way that the program is set up. Now, when we think about...
Can I stop you right there? Because I'm actually having trouble understanding this. You're saying the money, the $7,300, I thought it goes directly to the school. How would the parent use some of that money for something else?
Right. So the law actually carves out that tuition is the first expense that must be utilized. These scholarships must be utilized for. And if there are additional dollars in that $7,300 that you mentioned,
which seems unlikely. I mean, that most tuition's more than that. Right?
You might think that. And I think, over the last 6 months or so, as I've been working on advocacy around this issue, that is what most people believe is the norm. Now, I also have heard the inverse of that experience, where there are schools that, have a lower tuition rate than what the scholarship will provide. And actually, I've heard questions from families saying, when will I hear from the state about how to go buy the uniforms, how to buy the tuition, tutoring services? So I think we have experience on both ends, and we just need to work a little harder to bring awareness to the range of opportunities and issues and circumstances that these parents and families are experiencing.
Got it. It's your turn to talk, and today we're talking school vouchers. If you'd like to join the conversation, give us a ring, 615-760-2000. You can also leave a comment wherever you're watching, which is probably YouTube, which is where we're streaming the show these days from time to time. So join the conversation, 615-760-2000. We'll head back to the phones. Brenda in Nashville, you're on This Is Nashville.
Thank you for taking my call. One question is, how much of this private funding voucher is going to religious schools?
So you mean taxpayer money, basically public funding? How much of it is going to religious schools?
Right.
All right. Chelsea, I've seen the list of schools. Have y'all done a breakdown of how many you would consider religious?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I will tell you that number is easily gettable. There are 4 categories of private schools that exist in Tennessee, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those schools are all eligible for this. It does not necessarily mean that every school is a religious school, but that's certainly numbers that we can find out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at the list of schools, I believe, Camelia, it's posted on the state website, correct?
Yeah, it's on the Tennessee Department of Education website. It has a list of schools.
Yeah, and if you look at a list for Metro Nashville, even obviously a lot of Catholic schools and other Christian schools, and certainly schools that I wouldn't even know if they consider themselves a religious school or not. Is there anything about the teaching of religion of any kind that is precluded by the program?
No, this program doesn't carve out anything around curriculum in particular.
Yeah, Camelia, that was part of the debate, or at least some criticism early on.
Yeah, some people were concerned about taxpayer money going towards religious teaching.
Yeah. Well, Brenda, thanks for your question. We appreciate your call as well. You can join at 615-760-2000. We'll try to get to as many phone calls as we can. Chelsea, I'm curious, is there a state that seems like they're getting it right? As you pointed out, there's a long history here. It may feel kind of new to folks in Tennessee, but other states have done it a long time, like Camelia was talking about in Florida, where she came to us from. What can we learn from the states that are doing well?
Well, I appreciate that question, and it looks a little different depending on which state you pick. Yeah. I mean, certainly there are programs that have been in place for a really long time. You think about Indiana, for example. That program grew and grew. It's been in place for a number of years. There are some other kind of southeastern neighbors of ours, Georgia and Louisiana, that passed programs very recently that maybe look a little bit more similar to ours in terms of the accountability and assessment that I mentioned. You also have heard lots of concern about how can we ensure that this program does not cause any trouble. There were some lessons learned, I think, that our state took from states like Arizona. But what I will say is I think that you are seeing a national trend for how we think about providing education, how we think about funding education at the state level. And this is something that, as in any other policy area in any other industry, folks will iterate upon and get better as you go. You learn lessons every time around.
We'll take one more call before the break. Susan in Clarksville, you're on This is Nashville.
Hi, hello. My name is Suzanne from Clarksville, Montgomery County, Tennessee. I've got 3 children in public schools. Been very interested in this whole conversation about vouchers. I am a graduate of a private school myself. So that being said, I know the previous caller mentioned something about the data that's being collected. So my question is, students who are maybe on an IEP, students who have neurodivergent issues, and students who may need a little extra help. I know public schools, you said, have to take everyone. With private schools, how can we ensure that the vouchers are going to be equitable and accessible for all students in Tennessee? Thank you so much.
Thanks for the call, Suzanne. Chelsea Crawford with Tennessee Can. Are there any requirements when it comes to learning special needs for students that a private school would have to accommodate?
Not outright, but I will say, there is kind of an existing expectation and law at the federal level that's been around for a really long time. It's called equitable services. It gets very wonky and very technical in implementation, but essentially what that is a partnership between private schools and public schools to ensure that students who do have significant disabilities or needs and are attending a private school can cooperate with those providers in the public school space. That's gone on for many, many years and certainly predates this program.
But no requirements beyond the federal requirements now.
Not in this law.
We need to take one more break. Coming up, we'll bring in a Vanderbilt professor in the studio here to talk about what we can learn, not just from other states, but from other countries and their experience with school vouchers. And we'll keep taking your questions, as many as we can. It's your turn to talk. We know there is plenty to say on the topic. 615-760-2000. We'll be right back. This is Nashville.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. We are focused on Tennessee's school voucher program, newly expanded for just about any family with a school-age kid. We know you have questions and comments. Some of you are waiting on the line. If you want to join them, 615-760-2000, or just leave us a question with Catherine, who's answering the phones. You can also join us on air if you hang on, or leave a comment on the YouTube stream at the Nashville Public Radio YouTube page. We're streaming, yeah. You can see video of this right now if you want. We've got Camelia Burris hanging with us, WPLN's education reporter, Chelsea Crawford from Tennessee Can, that advocates for school vouchers. We're adding a new voice that can help us look beyond the experience even in other states to how vouchers have worked out, but also in other countries. So Felipe Barrero Osorio is an associate professor of public policy, education, and economics at the Department of Leadership, Policy, and Organization at Vanderbilt's Peabody College. Welcome.
My pleasure to be here, Blake.
Well, Dr. Barrera Osorio, as I understand it, the main objective of your research is to study and test the effects of different school and system-wide education policies in developing countries. And in your experience, Colombia, Chile, and India have implemented good voucher programs. So what can we learn? What can you tell us about the system in Chile, which is, I think, had a voucher program for 40 years?
It started in 1981,
okay.
And it's a universal voucher program. And it is a program that was implemented very fast, and any person in the country was able to access the voucher.
So it was kind of like, you know what, instead of that money funding public schools, it's sort of you take that money and you can go use it however you want at a private school.
And that is something that is important. The money follow the kid, and they can use it in any private schools that accept the voucher.
I see. So 40 years later, I mean, this must just be like the water they're swimming in, and this is just how things are in public education. Do people consider it a success?
So that is part of the conversation that I was that I think is very important. One aspect is, what is the impact of the policy? And that discussion, I think, has to be very centered into the debate. So Chile, the best available evidence that we have is that the effects of the voucher system was at best small and positive in learning outcomes. But the most important, perhaps unintended consequence of the voucher was the segregation of the system. Low-income kids going to public schools, middle-income kids going to these private schools that accept the voucher, and high-income kids going to high-quality, not accepting vouchers private schools.
Wait. At the highest end, they went to schools that didn't even accept vouchers.
Yes.
Interesting.
And that is something about the design of vouchers, which is what is the amount of money of the vouchers will determine which schools want to participate. So if there is a correlation between price and quality, there you have an element that is important to consider. The voucher in Tennessee is $7,300, more or less, and that targets certain type of schools.
Yeah, I see. Well, all right, let's jump over to India, a much bigger country, but implemented something, it sounds like it was super ambitious. What did they try to do with their program in India? Not Indiana, India.
Yes, India, by constitution, created a program that was very interesting, which is 25% of the placements of any private school has to go to low-income individuals.
Wow. So a quarter of the school population has to have some sort of low-income threshold.
Yes. And that is targeted, is mean-tested targeted, and only kids, only families that has below certain income can apply to these places.
Are people considering it effective when you talk about outcomes for the student?
So this is not very. This is more recent. The evidence is emerging. The evidence that we have again is that the impact, if something is small, positive but small, and what is interesting is that the poorest of the poorest didn't apply to the voucher.
Really?
It was the less poor among the poor that the people are right to the voucher. And also that is important for Tennessee because information problems are going to be important for the voucher.
What do you mean?
So it's mean tested, the Tennessee voucher, and presumably...
Well, part of it's mean tested.
Yes.
Half of the vouchers, 10,000 of them currently, go to under 300% of poverty, I think the number is. The rest of them, no income.
Very good. So let's discuss the 10,000 that is being tested. Those ones who will have access to those, who will apply, presumably people who are better informed, people who had more resources, who have better social network. Those are the ones that are going to apply for those vouchers.
You're saying because they have the information of how and when, and they're listening, they're getting these questions answered.
Yes.
We're going to go back to the phones and you listen. Who knows who will answer your question? We've got a great crew here. So, Steve in Nashville, what's on your mind?
Yes, Blake. I just wanted to express some reasons for opposition to this program.
Okay. We'll listen.
So we're spending my tax money to go to people who can afford private schools, but they can take $7,500 in subsidy. Maybe it's a $20,000 year tuition, and they'll get $7,500 off their tuition, which they can use to take extra vacation next year. But meantime, I'm subsidizing these people. Now, the initial program was for people who with limited income when it was started, but now it's open to anybody, and so anybody $100,000 or whatever they might make can use this program.
Yeah, Steve, let me ask you a quick question. What do you say to folks who might push back and say, well, this is their tax money and they're not using up a seat in their local public school?
Well, we're not giving people money to go buy. We don't hand out money for people to go choose their school. Okay,
I think we kind of are doing that.
Well, but, public schools, that's the thing. We're taking away from public schools. What's going to be left, the private schools can't handle people with special needs, okay, most of them. So we're going to be left with public schools that everybody there is going to have some kind of handicap or special needs that private schools are not willing or not able to handle.
Steve, you raise an important issue. We'll take it there. And, in fact, our next caller is going to be that. So, Steve, thank you for that. We're going to go to another caller. Stephanie in Nashville, you're on. This is Nashville.
Hi. Yeah, that actually is my question. For children with a disability, a school needs to have an exceptional ed program in place. A lot of our charters or private schools don't have that. Is there some kind of process for accepting students with an IEP? Are we tracking that? How are we going to make sure that this really is available for all Tennesseans?
Stephanie, thanks for your call. Chelsea Crawford, while we kind of got some of that answer before, is there any requirement for even data collection of students who might have some sort of disability who are on part of this program?
Not that I'm aware of, but what I will say, I think if you've met a teacher, or if you're a daughter of a teacher like I am, I think teachers and educators want to make sure that children are getting the supports that they need. And I did mention earlier on the program that kind of equitable services federal requirement that ensures that there can be collaboration between private schools that may not have all of the services for children with disabilities to enable their cooperation with public schools who may have those services.
We have time to work in at least one more call here. Sherry from Sewanee, you're on This is Nashville.
Yeah, I've got a more philosophical question, which is that public schools were started because we saw education as a public good. If we're going to start saying that education is really just about what a parent needs and what a child needs, what makes this any different from me saying, instead of me using my public park, I want money to join a country club?
You definitely have taken it to the 30,000-foot level. Dr. Barrera-Osorio, is there something to be said there? Because you've looked all over the world on how these programs work.
So, yes, it's a complex question. When you think about education, you think a person like me think about, hey, why the government wants to intervene in the market of education. And there are several reasons of why. One is because there is benefits that goes beyond individual benefits. The society as a whole benefit from the investment. And the second one is inequality. So you want to invest in education from the point of view of the government to provide equality of opportunities. After saying that, it is not clear that the government is the most effective way to provide education. You need to guarantee good quality of education for everyone, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the government has to provide that education. So that is the discussion, and I think it's an important discussion.
Chelsea, would you like to add one more thing?
I would, yes. And I think that is a really great question. And I think Dr. Felipe and I, my new friend, have talked a little bit about the complexity of this. But yes, I mean, I think we want children to learn academic foundations in K-12 education. And as I mentioned, not even the best school is the best fit for every child.
Yeah. Well, that's all of our time. And obviously, this is an ongoing issue. WPLN's education reporter, Camelia Burris, will be on top of it. Thank you for joining us. And Chelsea Crawford of Tennessee Can, thank you for making the time to take our questions. And Felipe Barrera Osorio of Vanderbilt's Peabody College, we appreciate your perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Mary Mancini. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Limley. Catherine Rappelt on the phones. Our board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind that theme music you hear are Larange and Namir Blade. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get podcasts, or you can watch. It was streaming live on our YouTube page, but you can also go back and watch at Nashville Public Radio's YouTube page. Conversation doesn't have to end here. You can comment. You can tell us what you want to hear on the show. You can leave us a message at 615-751-2500. Also catch us on the socials at This Is Nashville. This is Nashville. I'm Blake Farmer. Go in peace.